We're staying at a place called East Crafton in Wiltshire, and it's not a stone's throw from the Kennet and Avon Canal. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to have a closer look at one of Britain's most fascinating and fantastic feats of historical engineering. We're going to take a look at the steam beam engines at Crofton, and then we're going to feast our eyes on the more marvellous Canal locks, and then hopefully we'll take a quick look at one of the brilliant aqueducts that go over the Kennet and Avon Canal, and hopefully we'll take a look at this one here at Avon Cliff, which is near Bradford on Avon. For hundreds of years, life in Britain had remained pretty much the same. In general, people worked on the land, living in villages and small towns, relying upon the local community to provide for them. But by the start of the 18th century, a transition so large was occurring. Life for many was never going to be the same again. The Industrial Revolution had started, and there was no going back. The transformation from an agricultural economy to that of heavy industry would require the transportation of raw materials such as stone for building the factories and coal to fuel the machinery. Hence, there needed a complete upgrade of the country's canal system. The Industrial Revolution saw a massive increase in building work around the country, with Bath stone being a prized commodity to rebuild London. Transporting heavy goods around the Channel, however, was hazardous though, and could take several weeks, so plans were drawn up to connect the rivers Avon and Thames via a canal. The job of building the canal fell to this man. John Rennie was already an accomplished civil engineer who had already designed many bridges, docks and canals. Work started in 1794, and after the construction of several locks, aqueducts and pumping stations, the canal finally opened 16 years later in 1810. Well, I'm here at a place called Upper Foxhangers Bridge, and it's just outside Devizes, and basically it was the last piece of the jigsaw, which was the Kennet and Avon Canal. And the reason it was left to the end was because of the natural difficulty that they face, and that was a rise in altitude of, from where I'm sat now to Devizes, a rise of 237 feet. So the engineers had to design and build a series of locks, 16 of them, all in a short length basically, and it was unprecedented in the building of any canals throughout the world. So yeah, it's basically a fantastic feat of engineering, built basically by navvies digging it out with picks and shovels. This flight of 16 locks was designed by engineer John Rennie and was opened in 1810. It was the solution to enable boats to make the steep hill climb into Devizes. The flight is iconic for many reasons. For a start, it's a massive feat of engineering from the heyday of canals, and one of the country's longest continuous runs of locks. It's also one of the ultimate challenges for many boat owners, demanding 4 hours to travel up or down. The Avon Cliff Aqueduct carries the Kennet and Avon Canal over the River Avon, here at Avon Cliff in Wiltshire, and it was built between 1797 and 1801. The aqueduct is 110 yards long and consists of a central elliptical arch with a 60-foot span and 2 side arches, each semicircular and 34 feet across, all with V-jointed arch stones. Okay, so now you know all the technical stuff. We'll find out how the thing nearly collapsed just after it was built. By the time the viaduct was open in 1805, the middle section started to sag immediately, and I think the engineer John Rennie regretted building the thing in stone in the first place, and he realised that it should have been made out of iron. But anyway, shortly afterwards they had to basically rebuild it, strengthen the middle piece up with more hard stone basically than the soft Wiltshire stone that they used. But anyway, as you can see, it's still standing.
The ghost has got a sore throat.
In recent years, the Canal and River Trust has overseen repairs to the aqueducts that serve the canal, sourcing stone that is somewhat harder and better quality than was used in the 1790s, and using building techniques I think John Rennie would have approved of. Numerous geometric symbols have been identified signifying the stone's source, so I went to take a closer look. These inscriptions here were inscribed by the stonemasons, and each stonemason had his own sign. It was a bit like the Egyptian pyramid builders, and the idea is that for every section that they made of the viaduct, they would put the inscription on it as the bit that they made, so that the inspector knew who built this part of the viaduct. So it's just a way of checking who did what, basically. One of the questions we've got to ask is, how do you replenish the water that gets lost naturally from this canal? When I say naturally, obviously evaporation, it seeps out the sides, and every time you use a lock, you lose thousands of gallons of water. So it has to be replenished. And that's going to be the point of our next visit, when we're going to visit a pumping station. And it's a very special pumping station because the water is going to be pumped by a beam steam engine. So that will be our next visit. When they built the Kennet and Avon Canal, it goes in some places quite high. It's about 500 feet above sea level, which is quite high for a canal. And at one of its highest points here in a place called Crofton, it needed a pumping station, and that's what I've come to see today. And in it, it's got the oldest working beam engine driven by steam in existence. So I'm going to take a look at it. The pumping station was built between 1807 and 1810, in time for the opening of the canal in 1812. 2 beam engines were installed, served by this one boiler. In 1968, the pumping station was bought by the Kennet and Avon Trust with restoration in mind. The building and both engines were restored, but the original boiler was beyond repair, so this boiler of the same type was acquired second hand. How long are you here shoveling?
We do a 2-hour shift, but I might do more than one shift. And it depends, we take it in turns. Normally we're short of people today because people have been ill and things. But normally we sort of take it in turns. Someone will fire and the other person will shovel and then they'll change around. But I've only got half an hour on my own, I can cope with that.
Well, that's long enough, I should imagine, doing that job.
I'm used to it now.
Do you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't do it if I did it. Oh, love the boiler, love the boiler. Yeah.
Apart from the usual working exhibits you would expect to find in a museum, the pumping station still operates an essential element to replenishing the water supply to the canal. Nearby springs feed an underground pond which is pumped up to a culvert to top up the canal. More on this in a moment.
Driver number 1, do you want the stop valve closed?
Thanks, David. Kevin here, driver number 1. Can you stop close number 1 stop valve, please?
Stand by.
These engines are the oldest beam engines in the world, still in the original building for which they were intended, and able to function as fantastically as they did in 1812. So when she's up and running,
Yep.
how many gallons of water is she going to pump through on
One stroke is 1 ton of water, 440 gallons of water. Does 10 strokes a minute, maybe 11. So you're talking in the region of 4,500 gallons of water a minute.
And that's
That's about, it's 5 tons, it's 10 tons of water. 10 or 11 tons of water.
remind me, where's the water supply coming from?
The canal.
I thought it was like you had like
We have got a lake.
like a lake, yeah.
Yeah, that is a small amount of water coming from that into the canal. That's controlled by the Environmental Agency in CRT because there are little invertebrates in there they don't want to get rid of. It was built for Wilton, it was built for Crofton. So yes, we are literally recirculating water from the lower point of the canal here at Lock 60, pumping it, lifting it up 40 feet, putting it into the launder. It goes up to the Bruce Tunnel, which is about 1.25 miles of the way, which is the summit of the canal. So it goes back in at the summit, so it can either go down to Devizes, or it comes back down this way to Hungerford and Newbury.
So basically we're in the middle point, basically. In the visitor centre, you're welcome to listen in on a short lecture about how modern technology enables the engines to run as efficiently as possible and the effect this has on the environment. Crofton is powered by volunteers, and they're all more than happy to share their experience and answer any questions you may have. The arrival of the railways signalled the beginning of the end of the canal system in the UK. When the Great Western Railway opened in 1841, the annual tonnage hauled on the Kennet and Avon Canal was 360,000 tonnes. By 1848, it had fallen to less than 200,000 tonnes. and by the 1950s, large sections had to close due to lack of use and poor maintenance. Since 1960, however, hundreds of miles of derelict canals have been brought back to life, many relying on volunteer labour and fundraising. More canals have reopened than during the canal mania heyday of the 19th century. The Rose, based here at Hungerford Wharf, is modelled on a traditional wide beam canal boat. She was commissioned in 1983 and built for the sole purpose as a pleasure trip boat, so members of the public can experience the beauty of this stretch of the Kennet and Avon Canal. All of the crew members on board the Rose are volunteers and are passionate about preserving the canal for future generations. The Hungerford section of the canal goes through some particularly beautiful scenery, and this 1.5 hour trip is designed to give everyone on board the chance to experience travelling on a canal boat and to give a brief insight into the history of the canal.
And it was all around moving goods from London to Bristol, because before then everything had to go down the Thames, turn right, go around the coast of Kent, all the way along the Channel, round the end of Cornwall and back up again. Long way, quite hazardous, going through some quite horrible sort of like sea.
Everyone was encouraged to get involved with a hands-on approach whilst we were on this excursion, like how to negotiate some of the necessary obstacles you'll find on a canal like this one, like operating a lock, for example. Oh, and I would just like to add that on this particular day there was no shortage of willing sailors. Heavy?
It is when it first starts and it's all right after, because it gets its momentum and it's greased, doesn't it? So it's alright. Yeah. Done that. Open my lock gate and closed it again. You are now moving 22
So I'm not sure that John Rennie, who built this canal back in the 1700s, would have envisaged that 200 years later his canal would basically be a tourist attraction, because basically that's what it's become. It's a shame really, all the effort that they put in to build it, to create a superhighway of the day to take heavy freight from London to Bristol, avoiding weeks really by sea going around the English Channel and the Bristol Channel. But unfortunately the peak of the industry of hauling things through canals was very short-lived, about 20 years, with the onset of GWR, the railways basically, and it put paid to the canal industry completely really. and it laid abandoned for, what you say, 200 years till 1970, when it was restored by volunteers, is what we see it today. So it was the end of the journey for John Rene's canal, and it's the end of our journey for visiting the canal, and it's been a very, very brilliant experience. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.